Welcome to Behind the Screens. I'm Kate Ficai. Today we're diving into the world of XR, sometimes known as location-based VR, as we talk to Melbourne-based creatives Emma Roberts and Ben Andrews. In work such as STARLESS, Ben and Emma blend the physical, sensory and virtual environments to allow the audience to co-create awe-inspiring experiences. Today we'll hear about how they came to create experiences in VR, what skills they draw upon, and how their work is pushing into new territories. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Emma and Ben. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you for having us.
It's nice to talk to other people.
I know, it's a weird time, isn't it? I know you've got heaps of really exciting projects on, and we would love to know a little bit first about your kind of career pathway and how you came to work in the area that you do as digital artists. Could you fill us in a little bit on your background to get started?
I actually came to VR and digital work completely by accident. So I started off studying archaeology actually at uni, and switched out of that to just a straight arts degree, did a film subject as a blow-off and ended up majoring in it because I really enjoyed it, and was volunteering at ACMI at the time, just because I was really good with kids. Babysitting was kind of how I was my job back then, and that was kind of just like glorified babysitting in like a cool, fun filming environment. We would do these film-based workshops where kids would learn to make short films. And off the back of that, because I was good with kids, I got asked by the organizer of that to do a similar workshop or help run a similar workshop at his studio, his film studio in Preston. And once that was done, he asked me to stay on board to help produce like actual film work and commercial work and that sort of thing. So I had no idea what I was doing. I'd never been in had any aspirations to end up in film or entertainment, and kind of had to learn on the fly. And then it's this one's fault that I ended up in VR off the back of that.
Yeah, so Emma and we met each other at Melbourne University studying film theory together. And there were a couple of subjects that we were in the same tutorial class, and so we got to know each other that way. And then a few years kind of passed. After film theory, I went and studied a Masters of Filmmaking at VCA. I completed the first year of a 2-year course, and then we both did honours together at Melbourne Uni, and I decided to put my kind of creative practical filmmaking skills plus my research skills together, and I started a practice-led PhD at VCA, and at the beginning that was in filmmaking. And essentially when I went around to the production period of my first or my second year of my PhD, there were some administrative kind of delays and issues with my candidature that actually forced me to not be able to make films at that stage. And there was just an opportunity that came up where a few people that we knew were starting to explore VR, and I had to try VR for the first time, and an opportunity arisen with VCA actually for their 50th anniversary of the Film and Television School, and they asked if I would direct and produce a short 3-minute, 4-minute immersion. And not knowing really what the technology was or how it was used or the technical pathway, I started to create that project. Emma helped out with that work. It was called The Moon Is Gone and All the Kings Are Dead. It was very, very, it was a very quick turnaround. It was very experimental, but it was also incredibly, incredibly interesting. And the responses to it were really fascinating. In fact, it became so interesting that I shifted my PhD from filmmaking into VR creation, and particularly this kind of blurring of VR within physical space. And during that time, Emma and I wrote a grant application to basically further this kind of experimentation with VR, and we got that grant. It was for Melbourne Music Week a few months down the track, and then we kind of evolved what we'd started to do in that first work in a second work, which was called All the Stars They Bleed Together.
Yeah. I guess it's a pretty common part. Like, there's a lot of people in VR from very different, like, strands of like, whether that's people from games or people from art or people from film. There's a lot of people from film. And so that's quite a common pathway to get to where we've come to. But we've gone a little bit further than just, I guess, creating films in VR, and we do some weird stuff, which I guess we'll talk about. But
so yeah, it was an accident. It was an accident,
totally an accident
on both of our parts, and how we started to work together was also an accident.
But I think like it was just like immediately fascinating to us beyond what we'd been doing and seeing in film, which is often very like. Film's been around for a very long time and a lot of things have been done before in film, but VR was immediately exciting and experimental and really just incredibly interesting. So we got hooked from there and kind of took off.
Well, in the next episode, we'll be talking, we'll be breaking down some of your projects in more detail. But I'm kind of intrigued because you do VR in a different way. It's not simply the user sitting down with a headset on and experiencing a world that you've created in there. So can you tell us a little bit about what XR or location-based VR work is?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So I guess I think when a lot of people think of VR, they think of a headset. I'm putting on a headset and I'm going to a different world or a different reality. XR and location-based VR are two different terms that describe, I describe it as like VR and there's a wide spectrum of ways that can manifest. But in our work in particular, we're really interested in not only what happens in the headset, but what happens to your body and what you're physically experiencing while you're in that headset. And that can be anything from multisensory stimulation. So, having scent, having touch. We play a lot with sound and physical sound in space. So having big subs and immersive soundscapes, so you can really feel bodily immersed within sound. But then also things like immersive theatre and performance and things like that are really key parts of our work. But
yeah, and it started kind of by chance as well with, and actually how we kind of began making location-based VR. It was before we even knew what that terminology was. It was just solely what interested us, and what interested us with kind of VR the first time that I used it was just how much it shuts out the real world, your physical surroundings, what surrounds you, and the sense of disorientation of taking the headset off and being faced in a slightly different orientation direction, and the way the light seems to change. And even though you might have been in the headset for only a couple of minutes, when you remove the headset and you kind of re-emerge, the world always feels slightly different. And our work has always kind of been around actually kind of building spaces for that, and for kind of allowing the experience of the work to take place across the entrance into a space, the immersion into a headset, and then the kind of re-emergence out of the headset. And the experience takes place always across those kind of three states. And location-based VR is just it's a descriptor for work that uses physical installations or physical environments with the headset, for kind of public installation rather than for content that might be downloaded at home and used kind of in a lounge room or a bedroom.
Yeah, it's about creating like a full-bodied immersion in some way, shape or form, involving not just what your eyes are seeing, but also what the rest of your body is experiencing too.
Wow. So we don't see a lot of that in Australia. Are you sort of fairly ahead of the curve in terms of doing that sort of work here?
It's really interesting. We were definitely some of the first. There are some notable examples, zero latency, some people might know. But yeah, to our knowledge, one of the third work that we made, STARLESS, is was the largest location-based work that's ever been exhibited in Australia at the time. Since then, there've been Lynette Warworth's work, Alavena, which was at ACMI, which is another example, but it's very uncommon in Australia, which is really interesting because when we started going overseas to talk about our work and to go to different festivals and that sort of thing, it's very much an accepted way of using VR and a very well understood way of using VR. And so that's really exciting as well, to be able to go and meet with other people who are playing in the same sort of playing field as we are. But
yeah, and it has led to some difficulties, I suppose, being kind of creating this work that isn't just solely kind of digital content based, and especially early on when we were trying to kind of source funding and grant opportunities, sometimes describing the work was quite tricky for people who had limited access themselves to what VR was, and trying to imagine how and why it's important to have these
to
kind
not
of
only have the headset,
yeah,
but also
and that the experience actually takes place more than just the kind of audio-visual kind of experience, but takes place through kind of performance or through kind of more kinesthetic experience or more kind of like bodily engagement with a kind of environment. So we definitely found that whilst kind of feeling a little bit like we were, I guess, trailblazing in Australia, that kind of also led to some challenges in terms of trying to articulate, I guess, what it was and why it was kind of valuable to and important to kind of have these additional elements.
Yeah. And how do audiences respond, when it is such a new experience?
I think it's a great question, and that's really what kept us going. It's what made me change from film into just creating these kind of XR experiences, even on a PhD level, is the audience response, particularly the audience response within these curated spaces, because the headset kind of functions a bit as a blindfold. Audiences aren't necessarily privy to some of these additional sensory experiences that are taking place kind of around them. So, for example, smell, it might be like we might be just kind of wafting some little like essential oils around the space, but for an audience member who doesn't have that as an expectation of there will be smell in this space, you start to kind of see audiences really open up from kind of like entering into these spaces quite closed and quite shut off to suddenly, and smell is a really good one. It's a really powerful part of the experiences, because often audiences will unconsciously follow the trail of smell around the space. And you start to see these kind of all these amazing, incredible, fascinating cues. So people's kind of hands kind of going from like quite a closed position to quite an open position. People's feet kind of starting to curl when like wind comes against their face, or to kind of move towards like, and we might be just standing wafting with like a chopping board from Kmart, but within the headset, it's very, and that's the interesting thing. It's very, very lo-fi in a lot of ways, but within the experience, the audience doesn't have that as an expectation, and therefore wind is or scent is just something that is experienced in a very, very direct kind of way. And we often say that that for, I guess, the work that we create, what we want to achieve is for audiences to come in as adults and leave as children, and to kind of have this kind of almost reawakening or rekindling with kind of
curiosity and awe and wonder and that sort of thing. We see, like, a lot of the time we have these phenomenal audience responses that are unbelievable, honestly, like people saying that they've never seen beauty before this, or coming up to us years later and saying that these experiences are something that they still remember very vividly and think about all the time, and have changed their way of thinking about the world. They can be incredibly strong experiences, and that's very addictive, particularly when you're coming from a film background where you create a piece of work and people will see it, years later, and you don't have that direct feedback. Whereas with VR, we've had incredible responses to our work that have really kind of energized those experiments and driving forward. Yeah,
it's a really good point. And in film, when you're creating a film, it's always for an audience, but that audience is always kind of removed in some ways from... They're always engaged, of course, and it's an active spectatorship, but it is always kind of distant to the screen and distant to the space that you're creating. Whereas in the kind of location-based world, is your audience is there, live, present within the space, and therefore... And this is something that we became increasingly interested in, is the work can kind of be spontaneous and improvised around audiences and for them, and be responsive to how a particular audience member might be responding. And that level of flexibility and that level of kind of curation and being able to kind of, just change and shift and alter things on the fly is something that, we found incredibly rewarding. And from each work into the next, that's kind of always what we look to kind of further explore and further understand and try to emphasize.
Yeah. So just what do you think about this assertion that people often have that VR engenders empathy for for the subject?
Yeah, it's interesting. You can see where it comes from completely, but I think like Katie Morrison, who's a really established VR producer here in Melbourne, often says that it's less about walking in other people's shoes and more about walking in your own shoes through someone else's experience. Like you're never going to. I think there's a lot of perception around VR can, you're going to become someone else and then you're automatically going to just feel their struggle and then you're going to come out of it with so much empathy. But I think there has to be a lot of craft for that to happen. And it's not a given because of the medium, in the same way as reading a book could give you so much empathy for someone if it's well written and you're really brought into that level of experience. VR is exactly like no more, no less, I feel, than other media. The one thing I do find interesting when it comes to that with VR is that if you read a book or you watch a movie and then you're talking about it afterwards, you'll say, the character did this, the character did this. Whereas I think games in VR are really interesting in when you talk about it afterwards, you'll say, I did this. And that active placement of yourself as the audience into the story does give there's an opportunity for it, but again, it has to be designed for.
Yeah, it has to be designed for. And luckily as well, I think the industry is starting to move on from that assertion and it has started to wane this idea that it is an empathy machine and that just because you're kind of in a expanded, visual space that feels a little bit more kind of immediate, that you will just organically you just feel empathy for a subject. Yeah, these things are much more complex than that. And I think that slowly that is starting to kind of wane, which is a good thing.
So I guess as VR practitioners, what skills do you draw on regularly from projects? Is each project a massive learning curve or how does it work?
Yeah, do you want to start?
Yeah, each project is definitely a massive learning curve. So because the technology is so new and because what we're doing in it is so new as well, even though there are these quite a lot of creators now internationally working in this space, there's infinite possibility of different combinations of physical elements, performance elements, things inside the headset. And so we find that we're always pushing at least one boundary, sometimes 10 boundaries, and that can be a lot. We often, so we're really lucky in that we work with a really strong technical team and creative team, and we tend to work very collaboratively. So we, in as much as we're not actively using, we don't code, for example, or we have basic coding knowledge, we will often be working with people who do understand that world and are really fantastic at interpreting, us asking, we want the audience to feel this way, and they'll go, okay, here's 3 different ways through code that we can achieve that feeling. So we'll often, I feel like we use a lot of communication skills as super, super key, and team management side of things across both the creative and the technical element. Did you want to speak to working with sound?
Yeah, I mean, for the way that VR is created is in a game engine called Unity or Unreal, and for those who know game engines, they're incredibly complex software. They're world built. You can build whole physics systems, whole worlds inside there.
Rebuild reality the way you want it.
Yeah, and therefore it is a really kind of complex technical part of creating work, and we have a slightly different approach in the way that we typically go around creating kind of work, and it's part of it is about streamlining the process for ourselves. Is we often work sound first, so sound having such an important immersive effect and having such a strong, I suppose, capacity to create the feelings that you're actually looking to create within the experience. And as we mentioned before, a lot of our work is live sound, so sound that's actually in kind of a quadraphonic setup. So instead of stereo audio, you have 4 at least 4 kind of speakers that create that sound space around you in a physical setting, or working with live musicians within the space as well. So you have that kind of extra element of live sound, which is kind of this, it's a small difference, but also a really large difference in the way that you experience that. And so we often work with our sound team. We've been very lucky to work with the same artists for quite a long time, Matt Fasandia and Erin Taylor, as part of the Convoy. And so we actually develop a lot of the arc of the experience, the trajectory of the experience through the way that sound actually works, and the kind of feeling states that we're looking to achieve occurs through sound. And then we look to then map visuals and the kind of VR side of things onto that framework, I guess. And for us, that's just been a really effective way of ensuring that we're always moving towards the same place, and that place is always around the kind of experience that we're trying to create, but also, on quite small budgets and with small short turnarounds, kind of being able to streamline that process and make sure that the development in the VR side of things doesn't kind of weigh down the rest of the development of the project. Has been, it's been really effective.
Yeah. And the other 2 sides of things that I would say is we try and be really creative all the time. So trying to be really playful and turn on that like childlike way of thinking of like, wait, what happens if I put my feet in water while I'm in the headset? What happens if I sit on the swing while I'm in the headset, which turned into a really fantastic discovery we built an experience around. So that's really key. And then like one skill that I think I tend to be quite strong in and was through high school and never really thought about as like a career thing, particularly in creative industries, is I'm quite good at like writing and communicating. And I didn't really realize when we first got into like producing or creating VR work generally is that is a really important, like, get you someone who can like get other people as excited about your work as you are. And that's we spend a lot of time writing grants. We spend a lot of time pitching and talking to other people about our work. So that's something that comes in handy.
That makes me wonder, actually, because the process of, applying for funding for films is often that you need to have your script and your idea fully formed. Even with documentary, you need to have a story that you're going to be able to deliver on. So how does that work with VR? So, I mean, you're working in an extremely exploratory sort of experimental space, which is why it's so exciting. But how are you able to secure funding when everything hasn't already been sort of revised or nutted out in a script?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, it is a really good question, because in a lot of ways, VR, particularly VR that's in that live kind of space or in that location-based, it's like your kind of pre-production, production and post-production phases that would be in film are all collapse into just one single deadline, which is when it goes live or when the kind of public exhibition and audiences arrive to try the work. So it's kind of interesting in that way that that some of those kind of stages of production actually don't really have the same distinction in VR.
Which I guess is like quite similar to how you'd look at, say, immersive theatre, that, it's not really the thing that it is until the audience is inside it. So we tend to use a variety of different techniques. We'll often storyboard for ourselves through a tool called Tilt Brush, which can help us. It's a really simple tool that you can create a really quick virtual world with absolutely no skills in art, and kind of like step through it and go, oh, this needs to be bigger, this is working, this isn't working. So that's one thing that we use. We will often describe the arc of the experience, and we'll do that in first or second person usually, to kind of help the funding body or the person that we're pitching to understand what the user experience is. We've just started working on our first scripted work, which has been really interesting. So that we're really lucky in that we've optioned, so we've bought the rights to a pre-existing work that already has a script. We're going to adapt it slightly, but so that was really helpful in that we do come with a largely finished script, but then we need to work around like how do we make that for VR. But we're really lucky in Australia, there's a lot of funding for development. And so a lot of the time what we'll do is go first through a stage where we get down that small summary of what the user experience is, and then we'll put some material together, bring our team together, maybe do some concept art, and then we'll take that to an organisation for development funding to write more script or to do a prototype, for example, is what we did with development funding for the work we're doing currently. And then we take that prototype and we use that to say, this is where we got to, this is the things that now need to happen on top of that. It gives us an idea of timelines and budgets and that sort of thing. So it's really like one foot in front of the other.
We're fortunate in the VR space as well, is that the eligibility of funding is actually a bit wider. So you can apply for funding in a more kind of screen visual way, so through Film Victoria and through Screen Australia. For example, or in the more kind of art and multidisciplinary pathways. And that's something that's eligible for us because of the kind of work that we create. And that allows us to go through the kind of creative Vics and the OzCos. And so we're kind of fortunate, I guess, that we're not as siloed, I guess, in those kind of funding arrangements that or funding models that we have to kind of try to participate in.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, there's 1,000 questions that I would love to ask, but we're out of time for this episode. Really look forward to our next episode where we're going to ask you to break down some of the projects and go into a bit more detail about some of the works that you've created. So thanks again, and we will see you soon. Well, join us next Monday at Behind the Screens as Ben and Emma talk us through a series of their immersive multi-sensory works, including STARLESS, Gondwana, and their next project, Jump Blue. And for more insights from leading screen professionals, watch the rest of Behind the Screens and our Running Free series on the ACMI YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe.